Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices focusing on the 17 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Today, our guest is Brittney McDonald, who is the founder of Blank, a platform bridging the gap between climate innovation and creative expression. Prior to founding Blank, Brittney spent a decade at various global creative advertising agencies before transitioning into a startup world, helping to build companies from the ground up. It's through that work she began focusing on initiatives that create significant impact at a systemic level. Over to you, Brittney.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be sharing a bit about culture and sustainable solutions within culture and just exactly what that means and how we unpack that a bit. And really the importance that culture has in being influential at both a business level and at an individual level. So as you mentioned, my background has really been in the creative advertising space for the last decade. And then I went into the startup world for a bit. And it's really in the startup world that I saw this white space between brands that were in a Series A, Series B, very much an emerging setting that all had an angle around how they should be sustainable, but they didn't have a way to actually showcase that to consumers that at the end of the day have the purchasing power and have the ability to scale the businesses. And of course, my background was in creative advertising. So it was this interesting opportunity that I saw to highlight these emerging brands that really could be the next wave of businesses and really have a substantial impact in culture, like you said, to create real systemic change and do more than just, advertising, but really motivate people to use their brand loyalty and use the purchasing power for good. So what I'd like to do is take you through a bit about Blank, what Blank believes, why Blank exists, how we actually focus on bridging this gap between culture and creative expression and getting these businesses to the forefront of consumers and how we start to educate and empower people. I have a few slides. I'll go through them and then we'll open the floor for questions. So let me go ahead and share my screen to make sure everyone can see this. Okay. So sustainable solutions in culture. So I want to start by setting the tone with this provocative statement. Sustainability is not a business problem. It is a human problem. It's human-centric and humans are informed by culture. And I think that this is really important because unfortunately, I think sustainability has become a bit of a buzzword and has become a trendy topic when there are very real issues attached to it that require very urgent action, right? This is the whole discussion that we're kind of talking about with the UN and the initiatives that they have. But I think people forget that this is a human problem. So we always think about this at Blank, even though we are a business. We do, keep in mind that sustainability is a human problem. And we believe that humans are informed by culture. There's a lot of information out in the world, right? There's a lot of various platforms that have different perspectives. And it's not just about a business problem. It's not just about a business objective. It's about creating systemic change at a human level so that collectively we become more aware of the solutions that are out there so that we can live our day-to-day lives without massive disruption. So we believe consumers, sorry, I just need to do one thing. We believe consumers learn best through culture and that society's cultural pillars can be reimagined to be resilient towards climate change and regenerate our planet's natural resources. Like I said, there's a lot of information out there as to how we can be sustainable. For us, when we talk about cultural pillars, we're really focused in art, food, and fashion. To me, that's just low-hanging fruit that emotionally resonates with people and allows people to understand in a very tangible obtainable way how they can be involved in combating the climate crisis, right? So there are, a lot of government actions that are involved. There's tons of nonprofits. To me, and this is one thing that I learned, and very much observed my time in advertising, is that narrative and storytelling works. Okay, it's why we have the Super Bowl. It's why everyone tunes in for advertising. It's why we have the fashion weeks. People resonate with emotion, humor, warmth. And so people have that connection to cultural industries and verticals that they feel passionately about. And so there's so much influence to have there to really infiltrate the narrative a bit and pivot that narrative so that when we're given the choice between a fashion brand that is not sustainable or perhaps fast fashion and one that is thinking about sustainability, both from an ethical perspective or, a carbon footprint perspective, we automatically go for the version and the option that is more sustainably responsible. So Blank is a multidisciplinary platform. We're bridging that gap between the brands that are thinking about climate solutions and innovation and creative expression, really focused in those cultural areas, right? So art, food, fashion. We're operating under a single hypothesis that if we can provide carbon literacy to people, they will make more eco-conscious decisions. And what I mean by that is if we give them the knowledge and we educate them with the solutions that are out there in a provocative way, where they actually can feel and understand the impact that their actions have, then, like I said, perhaps they will then go and choose the more sustainably responsible option versus the typical option that's maybe a little bit more convenient, maybe less expensive, but not the best solution for the longevity of the planet. So I know we're all aware of, this quote and the goals that we have to reduce the carbon emissions in half by 2030, which is crazy to think it's only 8 years away, and to be net zero by 2050. But I wanted to throw this up because I do think, what we're talking about, the urgency around this is very real, but it takes a collective effort from various parts of the economy, our society, our communities, and really, the two pieces that have always jumped out at me in this quote are businesses and the participations of citizens and our communities, right? This is essentially what Blank is doing. We are that intersection between businesses, emerging brands, emerging talent, designers, chefs that are thinking about sustainability at the onset of whatever they are doing, whatever output they're creating, and these communities, the consumers, right? We are that intersection. We are that conduit connector, that trusted brand that can bring the two together. Because it's amazing that there are emerging brands and businesses that are thinking about sustainable solutions and being innovative in how they're thinking. It doesn't mean anything if it's not getting in front of people that actually are able to help drive the business, scale the business, expand the business, and also start shifting their mindset to think about choosing solutions that are more sustainable. And then on the consumer side, there is a lack of awareness, and there's a lack of there's a perception that there's not a lot of solutions out there when it comes to sustainability. I think especially, in the fashion category, one of the observations that we've seen has been that if it's sustainable, then it's less than. And what I mean by that is that, and I hate to use this word granola, but I think that there's this perception in fashion in particular that if it's sustainable, then it's kind of granola. And, it's poorly made and it's a lesser quality. That is so far from the truth. There are, and we'll go through some of these brands that we've worked with in a minute, there are some incredible fashion brands out there that are thinking about sustainable solutions from an ethical perspective, a carbon footprint perspective. They're not using mass manufacturing, so they're reducing their energy. And those people just don't know that that exists. They don't know that those solutions are out there because they haven't been given the information and the tools to go ahead and make those decisions or make that, purchase, so forth. So Blank is that conduit, right? We are always looking for the new wave of brands, the new innovations, the new designers, the chefs that are thinking about sustainability at the onset, right? And we always want to bring them to consumers and we do that in a various amount of ways, and I'll go through that in a minute, but really focused on creative expression and resonating emotionally with people so that, like I said, they feel empowered to make the right decision to live more sustainably. So let's talk about how we do that a little bit. So we have a few key areas of focus. Just one second, I need to change this. Okay. We have a few key areas of focus that help us bridge that gap. So, as I've said, my background has been, the traditional advertising side. I then worked in the startup world for a while. And now, we have a whole service side and exhibition side of the business for Blank to really get, brands in front of the world. So, we do strategic positioning, we do public relations, creative ideation and development. Those tend to be more on the traditional side of marketing and advertising. But then we really dive into, connecting brands and different categories to cross-pollinate when it comes to global innovation economies, regenerative economies, right? We do a lot of work up in the Bay Area with emerging innovations and brands that are focused on agriculture, food innovation, things that are actually going to, shift the needle to be sustainable, truly sustainable. Visionary thought leadership workshops. We do brand representation. So making sure that those brands that we work with actually can scale, can get in front of the right audiences, can get in front of the right key decision makers, emerging brands and innovations. We do bespoke exhibits. This last year we did 5 bespoke exhibits. Yeah, we did a soft launch out in London. We did an LA exhibit around waste and minimizing waste, and how do we give people the tools to know where to put their waste, particularly electronic waste, because that's a really big issue in terms of the landfills. We did 2 exhibits up in the Bay Area. And then we just wrapped at New York Fashion Week this last September, really highlighting designers that are focused on sustainable innovation, material, so forth. And so, like I said, our cultural drivers are art, food, and fashion, because we think those have the most influence in making people change their behavior, change their purchase power. I think, one of the things that I wanted to hit on is when we look at emerging brands and the brands that we want to work with and represent, and the designers and the chefs and so forth that we want to work with, we are very diligent about who we work with, right? I think, there's a lot of greenwashing out there, and we do not want to work with brands or talent that claim to do something and then don't hold themselves accountable. Right. So we go through a pretty rigorous interview process with the founders, the teams. We do our own due diligence, essentially, of the brand to make sure that they are truly living a sustainable brand ethos. Right. So what is their carbon footprint? What is the science and the process behind the manufacturing? Are they treating workers in an ethical way? What is their supply chain? How are they shipping? Are they using air? Are they using ground, right? If they're using packaging, what is the packaging made out of, right? So there are various layers of the due diligence that we do in terms of bringing on brands, either for our exhibits or just for representation and services. And I think that's really important because it's one of the things that differentiates us, right? If we didn't do that, we would just be another agency. And that's not what we're creating. We are creating something bigger that holds brands and people accountable, so that when we are choosing a brand or product to work to show and to have people choose to buy, they know it is absolutely sustainable because it hits on a few key aspects that actually put us on that path of sustainability to meet the goals that the UN has set and to hold all of us accountable, to be quite frank. So to give you some tangible examples of how we showcase these sustainable solutions and the impact that it has had thus far, I'm going to take you through some examples of some of the fun stuff that we've done in the past year. So this is a art piece that we showcased. We worked with a designer, Moffat Takadiwa. He's based out of Zimbabwe. His entire perspective and approach on his artwork is taking the waste that is sent to Zimbabwe from Western countries like the US and put into their landfills. He goes into their landfills, finds the waste that has the hardest time decomposing. Particularly, there's a focus on electronic waste with his stuff. And he puts together large-scale art pieces that he then sells back to Western communities. He is absolutely brilliant. His work is absolutely stunning. We put together an exhibit in LA back in June. It was called Watching Our Waste. Watching Our Waste focused on art, food, and fashion. The entire theme across all three pillars was about how do we minimize our waste? How do we take waste that already exists and transform it into something new? How do we take clothes that would normally be going into, the landfills and teach people the process of upcycling? And what is upcycling? What does that actually entail? What does it mean? It's actually a craft of its own. It's not a secondhand reused thing. It's a completely new product. From a food perspective, how do we utilize ingredients that get a further use so that we're not just throwing waste into the garbage because we can't use a carrot top or a strawberry top? So how do we use ingredients that get more longevity from an entire chef's tasting from start to finish, right? How do we use ingredients that have a lower carbon footprint and really support local farmers so that we're only cooking with what's around us, right? So that's really what that exhibit focused on. This is one example of the piece that Moffat gave us. We actually had 6 pieces on loan from his LA gallery. And the impact here is that we were teaching through this exhibit all of the viewers the amount of waste that one piece saves, what you can do with your electronic waste, where do you go to throw out your electronic waste. And so we're educating people throughout the exhibit. So yes, it looks like a beautiful art exhibit. It looks like any other gallery show perhaps, but the takeaway is the most important. We want people to leave these exhibits saying, oh, wow, I have to be more conscious about my actions, where I put my waste, how I utilize water, how I utilize ingredients, and so forth, so that I can have a role in, combating the climate crisis. This is another example from that same exhibit. Again, the pile of clothes in the back was meant to showcase the issues around fast fashion and the landfills. There's no reason for us to ever create new pieces of clothing at this point. There's so much waste when it comes to fashion, not just from a waste perspective, but the amount of water that is used to create cotton, right? So, and fabric. So we really need to rethink our fashion use. And so part of this exhibit was, let's showcase the urgency around landfills that are happening with fashion. But then what you can't see in this picture was that we went through the entire process of upcycling. So it takes 10 t-shirts to create one new piece of one new top that's completely upcycled, right? So you start doing the math and you could put a whole collection together based on this one pile right here, essentially. So we did exactly that. We showed the pile. This is what's representative of what's going on in various parts of the world. And there's excessive waste when it comes to material. Let's go through the process of upcycling, again, informing people and changing the perception that upcycling is not the same as secondhand. There's nothing wrong with secondhand. They're just completely different. Upcycling is taking material and creating a circular fashion, process, essentially. It's regenerative, right? It's not linear anymore. We are just taking this material, basically undoing the material and putting it back together in something completely new, right? And there's beauty and craftsmanship in that. We just have to educate people on that, so that then when you have a whole new collection that's completely upcycled, you still feel like it's new, because it's a new piece, but it's made with existing material. We actually, worked with a brand for New York Fashion Week. They're called The Ethicate. They're based out of Paris. They take material from all the couture houses in Paris. So you can imagine how much excess material they have from putting together, couture collections. And they take all those pieces and they create new lines. It's absolutely brilliant. So the material already is such a high quality, because that they're coming from the Chanel's, the Pradas, all of that. So the material's already excellent, but the pieces are completely bespoke, customized, unique, and very niche to their audience set. So just that's an example of how upcycling is very luxury, high end, and there's craftsmanship behind it. Just real quick before I go to the next slide, this little art piece, that's another piece of Moffat's. He actually used soap dispenser bottles and sriracha tops and toothbrush heads to create this beautiful piece. So just another example of how he's using waste and creating it into beautiful installation pieces. So food, we also focus on food and the culinary aspect of that, and really focusing and working with chefs and brands to think about sustainable solutions in the creation. To me, food and the culinary world is a no-brainer. Food is emotional for everyone. Food is where, communities, strengthen. It's where families, share moments. Food is such a personal thing for so many people. So when we were starting Blank, it was basically a no-brainer for us to really be involved in the food scene and the culinary scene and all the changes that are happening, particularly up in the Bay Area. There are just so many innovations and so many great brands that are coming out of the Bay Area that they're going to change the way in which we think and have relationship with ingredients. So this, for example, we've done 4 food exhibits this last year. This right here is actually from our New York Fashion Week exhibit that we did. While the focus was fashion, we do put dinners, VIP dinners together for, key folks that we need to help scale our brand and also our brands. So this was put together by one of the chefs that we work with. The entire point of this meal, just to kind of show you how we think about, our approach to food, is everything that we used, we tried to use as much of the ingredient as possible. So, this was our amuse-bouche. It was just, a little bit of mousse, but obviously we used the egg to, whip the mousse together, but using and utilizing that eggshell as part of that serving platter was really interesting, so that we're not creating more waste. And of course, we wanted to highlight in a provocative way some of the issues that tie into fashion. So the egg is sitting on a bed of plastic. So of course you can eat the plastic, but we wanted to convey that you eat about a credit card's worth of microplastics a year. That is quite provocative, and it's a startling fact. But this is how we start to educate people in ways that they're able to educate. When we shared that negative information, most people were shocked to hear that, because we just go about our everyday lives as, without these pieces of information. But if we can deliver that type of provocative information through a way and a vehicle that people actually enjoy, then we have their attention, and we know that they're going to listen to what we're saying, right? So this was one example. You know, we work with a couple brands up in the Bay Area. They have yet to launch the consumers, but, you know, it's innovations like honey made without the bee, or coffee made without the coffee bean. So when we think about ingredients and brands like that are really shifting the way in which we create and produce mass ingredients and products like honey or coffee, that's going to have massive systemic shifts, because now we're reducing the manufacturing of coffee beans, and we're reducing the need for bees, which become just a human problem, right? You know, obviously I don't need to go into depth around why we shouldn't be using bees to manufacture honey. Up until now, that has been the only way that we know. But this one brand that we've been, you know, working with up in the Bay Area and have had the opportunity to partner with in the past, they have removed the bee, and it still tastes like honey. So when that goes out to the world, I would hope that people would be, you know, incredibly impressed with not only the technology that goes behind that, but pleasantly surprised to see that, oh, flavor doesn't have to be sacrificed because we've decided to use a sustainable solution at the onset of this creation, right? And that right there is what we really want to highlight with all the brands and the talent that we work with. Quality of life, product, day-to-day activities does not need to be sacrificed because you have chosen the more sustainable solution. So here's another example. This is faux fur from one of the brands that we represented at Fashion Week. It is completely plant-based, biodegradable. The inside lining is completely upcycled, right? So they're working on different formulas and processes behind the scene so that you still have a beautiful, luxurious product, right? When you touch this fur, you would never know it's faux fur, or that it's plant-based, right? Or that it's biodegradable. So you start to add these layers of information, and you want to support brands like this, right? So they just launched their first plant-based capsule. Obviously, you know, the colors and the quality, they're beautiful. Another example of how you can have a tangible, obtainable brand that's doing amazing sustainable things at the onset. Last example here, this is one of the shoe brands that we represented, right? And that we'll hopefully be working with in the future. What's amazing about this brand is that they use plant-based vegan leathers and merge new innovations into their manufacturing. And what I mean by that is they will take pineapple scraps, grape scraps from vineyards, infuse these scraps into the process to make durable leathers, right? So they are truly plant-based leathers because they are taking waste from another industry, another product, and applying it to a shoe, something that we're all very familiar with, right? And, you know, the quality of these shoes are on par and competitive, if not more durable than any other high-end caliber shoe, right? The quality and the craftsmanship that goes into this is phenomenal. It's absolutely brilliant. And what interests me and my team, and where we have fun with all of this, is yes, it's fun to put, you know, creative outputs out in the world, to do advertising exhibits, but where we get really interested in this stuff is learning the process and the science, and take us through the process of how this is in fact sustainable, because we want to understand from start to finish, where are you sourcing from, what's the process, how much water, how much energy, how many people does it take to create this, to then get this output that we take for granted every single day, right? For us, like, a shoe is a shoe, but these shoes are tackling issues in other categories. It's tackling the waste issue. It's tackling, you know, the ethical working issues, right? And so this is a great example of a brand that we love to represent and we'd love to partner with, because they're doing really amazing things and they have a very clear vision. And I think for us, you know, when we talk about the power of narrative and storytelling, right? There is an interesting perception around plant-based or vegan, whatever, like vegan insert, whatever the product is. We have to change that narrative, right? These are just alternatives to regular leathers or, typical legacy processes that exist, right? So I love being involved to help shift that narrative a little bit, because we have to change our mindset to think in a more solutions-oriented way. And so really all these brands and a shift that they're all making and Blank helps orchestrate is we need to have this shift from just offsetting to being sustainable at the onset, right? We need to shift from thinking as, how am I gonna, offset what I've already done? Solutions as an afterthought. We need to shift that to be where we're thinking of solutions as part of the initial thought. What I mean by all of this is, offsetting is great. We can offset our carbon footprint as much as we want, but that's not going to create real change and real systemic change, right? In order to do that, we have to think about the solutions and the innovations at the beginning, at the onset of what we're creating. Because if I just go about creating as I am right now, and I just decide to offset by planting some trees, I'm not changing anything. So we need to think about how we start to change, whether that be from the manufacturing side, from our sourcing side, how our work conditions. We need to think about those things at the onset so that we really start to create those shifts within the different spectrums of sustainability, right? Because sustainability is a spectrum. And so there are different areas that we should be focusing on. So if we can tackle pieces of that at the onset, then we're truly on the path to living in a sustainable future and really creating systemic change. So simply put, Blank's role in the world and the reason why we exist is to showcase these obtainable solutions to show how you can live more sustainably. That is it, right? And we just want people to feel empowered and have the information and be educated so that they can make more informed decisions. Purchasing power is a real thing. Brand loyalty is a real thing. And those are influenced by culture. I just truly believe that. So we just want to make sure that people have the information and that they know where those solutions exist and where they can support to collectively help lower our carbon footprint. Ultimately, what we are working towards is this notion of Blank approved, right? As I said earlier, at the beginning, we need to decipher what is truly sustainable and what is greenwashing, okay? So I think, I've worked with my fair share of brands over the years that all have their feel good, do good tagline out in the world, but they don't actually hold themselves accountable to that, right? So it's not true. That is greenwashing. So Blank wants to be that platform, and we are becoming that platform that is that trustworthy brand where if I know Blank is going to be putting on a Fashion Week exhibit, then all those brands that we have, and we have it as part of that exhibit, are actually thinking about sustainability in an ethical way, and they're sourced appropriately. We are creating essentially that due diligence so that brands that are part of Blank are in fact really thinking about sustainability in an actionable way. And ultimately, we want this to become that blue verified check mark for sustainability, right? There has to be some sort of checks and balances around what is sustainable, what is not, right? And we hold ourselves accountable to that too. We track our carbon footprint for every exhibit, every creative output that we put out in the world. We don't always share the data, but we track it. because we need that data to hold ourselves accountable, right? We track our water, transportation, ingredients, the waste, where are we sourcing things for everything? And sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, but I think the data is super powerful to have so that we are constantly holding ourselves as a brand accountable so that we can hold the brands that we represent and that we work with accountable as well. I'll just end with this quote. Every one of us can help limit global warming and take care of our planet by making choices that have less harmful effects on the environment. We can be part of the solution and influence change. And this could never be more true to what Blink is doing. The power of influence is so important. It really is what changes our mindset, our behavior, and ultimately, the power for us to be empowered to purchase and support the brands of the future that are in fact going to create a more sustainable world for us to live in. So with that, I think I just spoke for about 45 minutes. I want to save some time for questions, of course. Yeah, open the floor up to questions.
I found your presentation very, very fascinating. And the fact that you're using new technology for focusing on sustainable development goals is also excellent.
The first question from the audience is, how did you choose this career path and what inspires you to be creative?
Sure. Yeah. So kind of hitting that first question about this career path. So I feel that I was very fortunate because I knew at a very early age that I wanted to go into advertising. Just a quick story. When I was 18 years old, I remember being in high school and I was part of a mixed media arts class. And I was like, what does mixed media mean? I have no idea what that means. But it was essentially learning the power of advertising and the power that advertising has in various medium channels, right? Whether that be TV, print, digital, whatever that may be. And my teacher gave me a magazine ad. She asked me to reverse engineer what that brief would be essentially. And I remember it was the Donna Karan ad for a perfume. And I reversed engineered it and I just felt this passion around advertising. And I didn't even know that advertising was a legitimate business that you could get into. Flash forward then to, graduating college. I lived in Boston for a while, moved to New York, got into an ad agency, and I just loved it. I knew that that was what I wanted to do. I think that there's something so powerful in taking an insight and pressure testing it against research and then having to create something really beautiful that people react to. And it could be a positive reaction, it could be a negative reaction, but I just really fell in love with the whole process, as toxic as it could be at times, to be quite honest. The agency world is not very cookie cutter. It's not the nicest industry, but wow, did it really set me up to really understand and have discipline when it comes to creative execution and building a business. I was fortunate enough to work at some of the biggest agencies. I worked out of New York, I worked out of Paris, London. I got a taste of what different communities and how they react to creative output that we put in the world. I think over time, what happens is you work for an airline, or you work for a car company, or you work for a CPG brand, and that's all fun. I mean, there's some great work out in the world, but I always knew that I wanted to do something more that had real impact, right? And so when I then came to LA and I started working in the startup space, I was seeing all of these startups come out either from, Paris incubators or Silicon Valley, wherever they were. And that was so inspiring to me. It was that first moment where I said, oh, I can do this, but I don't know what I'm going to do yet. But it was sitting in the startup world that I really saw this open space where everyone has a perspective on how they can be more sustainable, but no one actually knows that those solutions exist. You know, every single startup that I worked with, whether it be med tech, financial tech, you know, fashion, whatever, agriculture, they all had a spin on how they were sustainable. And that's great, but no one knew that. No one knows what they're doing. So that was really where Blank started. I think where I get my inspiration is honestly just going out in the world and talking to people. I never don't take an interview or a meeting with anyone. I talk to everyone that's introduced to me, whether it, you know, is something that becomes valuable in the short term or the long term. I'm learning something. And I think, you know, being curious helps. You know, I was out at a fashion event on Sunday, and it was an okay event. It wasn't the best event, but I just felt so inspired from the founder that was putting the whole thing together. So right then and there, I was like, oh, I got to do XYZ. We got to do this whole concept store. Like, and it's just like in a split second, something will inspire me for us to create a whole business model or an exhibit structure or a format out of that, right? Ultimately, I just want people to feel empowered to make better decisions, right? And that can look different based on what we want people to do. But creative is a powerful thing. And so I get my inspiration from various places, right? Just like talking to people, going to art exhibits, seeing where we can like do better in the world, whether that be fashion, art, food, so forth. It's just kind of really getting out and staying active.
That's really great. Thank you for sharing. And so I know someone who's a fashion designer, and her perspective was that she thinks it'll be very difficult to make fashion sustainable and that it requires like a huge investment. And she seemed a bit skeptical given how much waste currently exists with materials throughout the manufacturing process. What are your thoughts on this? And what are some do you agree or do you have some contradicting opinions there?
I mean, I do agree. It is an uphill battle just because of the waste that is already out in the world, right? But I think that's why educating everyone on circular fashion is such an important piece. In theory, we do not have to create any new more material. We don't have to. It's already out in the world. The struggle and the challenge, that obstacle that we really need to figure out is how do we teach people and shift a mindset to talk about circular fashion, regenerative material, right? In a way that still feels new, that still feels cool and, you know, desirable. That's what we're trying to do with a lot of our fashion exhibits, or even the watching our waste exhibit. Or, you know, when we're working with brands, how do we highlight the aspects of their positioning that focus on those key obstacles that you're talking about, right? I mean, I think transparency too is a really big thing that we should just address. Like, no one's going to get it right the first time, right? And my biggest pet peeve is when you have like a big fast fashion brand that comes out and they're like, we're going to be, you know, carbon neutral by 2040. It's like, okay, no, you're not, because the infrastructure of your business model doesn't sustain that, right? Like you in fact cannot shift all of that. If you can, that's amazing. And I would love to be proven wrong. But I think transparency, just being honest with people about this is what we're doing. These are the challenges that we're having. Here's where we're going to pivot to try to change to get on the path of sustainability. Because I mean, your friend isn't wrong. You know, it's an uphill battle, but I do believe that we can fight it. We just have to collectively think about the best path forward and the areas that will have the most immediate impact, but then where do we start to plant seeds for that long-term impact, right? We're not going to get it right the first time. You're not going to get it right overnight, but it's about the education process so that we can all at least be on that right track.
That's a really good point. And funny you bring up education. An audience member had a question related to that topic. So what is the cost of educating the larger public to adapt these solutions, and how do you engage them? It's almost like when smoking became taboo, but there was a huge industry and policies started shifting and supporting the change. So do you think it will be the same for sustainable fashion?
I don't know. I mean, when you talk about like the cost, right? Like that could be, what is the literal cost to put these things on and educate people? Or, what is the more objective emotional cost around this? I mean, I think the emotional cost, there's nothing lost there. I think the cost though I actually think about this all the time. I'm going to take that back. I often think about, and this doesn't just apply to fashion, it also applies to food manufacturing, supply chain, so forth. Where we create solutions, we often take away from something else, right? So when we have, and what I mean by that is, if we're going to take away mass manufacturing and we're going to localize our manufacturing, and we're going to educate people on local manufacturing and the importance of local manufacturing, let's make sure we have a solution in place for those that work in mass manufacturing, right? Again, it all comes down to balance, right? And where we usually take something away, it means that someone has to either sacrifice or see the consequences of that. I think you would see that in fast fashion, right? Where there are economies that thrive off of fast fashion. So what's the lesser evil, right? I think that's a human cost, right? But I think, something has to change, because it's not sustainable for us to live that way. And we just need to think of the solutions across that spectrum. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you. What is one of your favorite projects, or maybe one of your favorite sustainable brands that you could kind of give an example, and why?
So one of my favorite projects, it was probably, one of the favorite projects that we've done. It was probably the Watching Our Waste exhibit that we did in July, and we're actually bringing it to London in 2023. That was my favorite because it brought art, food, and fashion together under one roof. It showed how solutions can actually cross-pollinate, and it's not, siloed into different sections and sectors. But most importantly, I just love seeing people have a positive reaction to what they're seeing and taking the actual solution away. I felt like that exhibit displayed a beautiful, high caliber, output, but people left saying, oh my God, I had no idea that we consume and we generate that much electronic waste. Oh, I didn't even know that upcycling was a whole craft of its own. Like, where can I buy X, Y, Z? Or, really having an intimate connection with the food that we're giving them. And like I said, around, the microplastics credit card, like, you see that aha moment take place with people. And that to me is just the best feeling ever. Some of the brands that, we've had the fortune of partnering with or working with, O2 Monde, the shoe company that I just shared, I'm absolutely obsessed with them. I love everything that they're doing, from just the onset of thinking and their process. And then the output is absolutely stunning. It is from start to finish, the perfect embodiment of the type of brand that we like to work with, right? Another one would be, and I'm not going to share the name of this because they haven't launched to the public yet, but one of the companies up in the Bay Area that are creating honey with no bees. That is like, when I first heard that, I was like, how are you creating honey with no bees? And they're like, we found like the molecular prototype and they figured it out. And guess what? It tastes just like honey. That is insane. So if they can get that to a go-to-market stage and ready for mass production in some way, that's going to change the honey game. It really is. So those are the things, those are the type of brands that really get me excited, right? And it's not to say that we haven't worked with larger legacy brands to help them figure out to get on their path of sustainability. But what really gets me excited are these small startups, these emerging brands that are really going to have systemic shifts over time. And we haven't even seen the beginning of the impact that they have.
So interesting. Thank you for sharing. And it's cool to hear about the exciting work you guys are doing. So how do you think we can create the right culture and mindsets and engage people, reinforce sustainable solutions? Like, do you think what you're doing today and what other like-minded people are doing in terms of sustainable fashion, do you think it has the power to kind of truly drive us toward a more sustainable future?
Yeah, 1000% think it does. I think that it just comes down to how provocative you can be and how impactful that message is. It really comes down to the power of narrative and how you convey something that moves people to want to say, oh, I have to change my behavior. So
that makes sense. And so you talked a bit about vetting brands effectively to prevent any sort of potential greenwashing, as that's been an issue since the market's very new. You know, lots of people are kind of branding themselves as sustainable when they're not truly. So you mentioned an interview process. Can you elaborate a bit on like specific tips or examples, things you look out for when vetting brands?
Yeah, we go through a pretty rigorous interview process where it's myself and my immediate team that's focused on the sustainability aspect, meeting with the founders, the creative directors, that key person. So we start with an interview and we have a number of questions that we ask them. And oftentimes, like just to kind of take a step back, the way that we actually get engaged with these brands are either we get introduced to them, they get referred to us, or they've seen, you know, something out in press and they've approached us, right? So regardless of the way they get into connection with blank, we go through this process, right? I mean, we even worked recently up in the Bay Area with a large car company, and we went through the same process because there was no way that I was going to attach blank's name with a car company that didn't in some way, shape, or form live or embody some sort of sustainable aspect into their initiatives, right? Because again, we need to hold our brand accountable from the get-go. But we go through a rigorous interview process, right? So we start with, tell us about the origin of the company. How did you get started? Why do you want to focus on sustainable solutions? Okay, now take us through the process in which you create, right? Tell us your carbon footprint. Where are you sourcing from? Tell us about your manufacturing product. Do you know how much water you consume, how much energy you consume? Tell us about your packaging. Okay, if you're sourcing ingredients, where are you sourcing these ingredients from? What are the farms? Are the farms organic? Are they sustainable? So we go through layers and layers and layers based on the information that they give us. And then of course, like we go back and we research it a bit just to make sure that that due diligence is legitimate. But it really comes down to that interview. And also, you know, they need to be aligned with our values as well. You know, we don't want to represent companies that aren't authentic.
The next question is, are you aware of partnerships in the financial services sector, separate from fashion, which is more your world, but some people say that financial institutions have the capital necessary to bring the required funds from developed nations to developing nations to transition toward green energy sources. Do you think there's similar type of campaigns, creatives that can be leveraged in this sector?
Totally. No, I think that the same like creative, the same messaging can be applied to any sector. And I think just to wrap the last question that you asked, Susie, I think what we're doing, that format, the idea of creative expression and educating people can be applied to any sector. It can be applied to finance, it can be applied to, medical needs, whatever it is, right? We're just choosing to focus in these cultural areas because I really do believe that it has the most influential power. It's not to say that finances don't have other influences in different sectors, but this is just where I get my inspiration. So,
are you particularly focusing on the fashion and food? Because actually I was reading an article a couple of days ago that now they are beginning to serve food in plates that are edible. So
yeah. So we focus on food, fashion, and art. So those are the three main verticals that we really like to find solutions within. And best case scenario is when we're able to take all three and represent them in one output, or bring different brands together to collaborate. Because I think, one of the biggest obstacles is that you have amazing brands that are just so siloed because they have tunnel vision of what their focus is, right? And so oftentimes they may have a great solution or a great process or a theory on how you can be more sustainable, but they don't talk to anyone else because they just have their eye on, their end goal. So Blank really is about bridging those different brands within different verticals in the cultural space so that we just bring larger awareness and more awareness.
What you're saying is very, very valid. My concern is it's going to be very difficult to persuade manufacturing to go back to manufacturing, whether it's blenders or washing machine or something or whatever it is, that will be sustainable.
Yeah,
I have a blender that I have for 40 years and it still works perfectly.
But that's in theory sustainable. You've had it for 40 years. You've had it for 40 years. I would argue that's more sustainable because you don't need to buy a new one, right? And again, this is just part of having that transparent dialogue, right? Leather, for example, let's take leather. If you have leather, you're not a terrible person. All right. If you eat meat, you are not a terrible person. You do not have to live a balance of extremes to be sustainable. But if you have a leather, sustain that leather, get the most use out of it, because it means that you don't have to create something new in this immediate, I need something new all the time culture, right? You don't need this immediate gratification. I do think that's just something that we need all the time now. But sustain that, get the most use out of your denim jeans. It's kind of cool to have stuff I wear stuff that my mother gave me. And at first, when I was younger, I was like, oh, I don't want your hand-me-downs. Now I think it's kind of cool because she had great style and it's beautifully crafted. And that is sustainable, even if it's leather, even if it's fur, right? We just need to have these transparent dialogues, because don't support large manufacturers, support local farmers. So this is just having a transparent dialogue. We don't need to live this balance of extremes. We just need to kind of have all the information so that we can make the most informed decision.
Well, thank you once more, because we're really running out of time for your presentation. It was fascinating. I really hope that it's going to get the attention that it deserves. And we wish you the best of luck in all of your endeavors. Susie, thank you for hosting. And I wish all of you a very, very good, safe, and healthy week. Bye-bye.
Have a good one. Bye.